An impeachment trial began in Mitsuha's house. Sabine was the judge, Colette was the prosecutor, and Mitsuha was the defendant. She had no lawyer. She didn't feel like she had a chance in hell of victory. "Why haven't you brought us here until now? Do you have any idea how much of our precious lives we've wasted?" Sabine shouted. "Yeah. Even if there was a reason you couldn't, you should have at least brought us takeout," Colette added. She was in friend mode rather than vassal mode, and wasn't holding back. Mitsuha could tell from her tone that she was genuinely angry. Mitsuha turned to Colette first, thinking she would be easier to convince. "The lunch you ate today cost 2 small gold coins." "Wah." Colette turned pale and fell silent. "All right, that's 1 enemy ship sunk. Too easy." Colette had developed her sense of money in a small village where families didn't have much cash income. Spending 2 small gold coins would have been unthinkable for a family's last meal before they all committed mass suicide, let alone lunch for 1 child. If they had 2 small gold coins, there would be no reason for a family to kill themselves in the first place. 1 small gold coin is worth about 2,500 yen, so I'm not even lying. Mitsuha then turned to Sabine. "Do you want to live here if anything happens to your home?" "What?" This was a question Mitsuha needed answered. "If the capital were attacked again like it was when the Empire invaded, but this time I couldn't bring a band of mercenaries, you know what would happen, right? The kingdom would fall." "Yeah. Sabine's a smart girl. She knows exactly where I'm going with this. If that happened, would you want to abandon the kingdom and live as a commoner, either here or somewhere else on your continent? Or would you go down with the ship as a member of the royal family? In other words, I'm asking if you would want to tie your fate to your family and your people, or if you would want to start a new life," Mitsuha finished. Sabine spent some time thinking and then asked, "Would I be with you? Or would I be alone?" "Yeah, that's an important question. I can't say. We might escape together, or I might make a mistake after evacuating you here and die. In case of the latter, I've made sure you'll have a guardian and enough money to live on, so you won't want for anything. The odds of you ending up here alone are pretty slim, but you should be aware of the possibility. I'm also going to bring you here any time during this trip I think we might be about to face danger. And I need you to be clear that if anything happens to me under those circumstances, you'll never be able to return, regardless of the state of the kingdom. You would have to live in this country without me. Again, I think the odds of that are vanishingly low, but not 0. If you don't want to face that risk, I'm going to have you rejoin the delegation when we meet up with them next. Okay?" Sabine didn't answer for the rest of the day. Phew, okay, managed to avoid any more questions about lunch. It wasn't until the next morning that Sabine responded. "I think my parents and my siblings would rather I live on in a new land than die along with them. And that's what I want, too. I want to live with you and Colette, and even if I'm alone, my survival would mean the royal line would not perish. I could start a new family here in this country," Sabine declared, looking every bit the noble. "And I want to keep traveling with you, of course. Anything that could kill you would mean the deaths of everyone in the delegation, anyway." Mitsuha, that hurts. Before Mitsuha knew it, she was hugging Sabine as hard as she could. Mitsuha spent the whole day teaching the girls how to use all the appliances in the house, what to do in an emergency, where the survival kits were, where and how deeply important things were buried, and everything else they needed to know. She wrote instructions for all the most important things, using the language of the other world so that people from Earth wouldn't be able to read them. People from the other world would, of course, but that didn't matter. They got pizza for lunch. Mitsuha was looking forward to their reaction, but they were no more excited than she had expected. Next she taught them how to place an international call to the mercenary captain, and showed them where she'd hidden a voice recorder with a message for them to play him over the phone. With it she left a letter, and showed them how to mail it internationally. There was more to teach them, but she could do it over time. Mitsuha took the girls to a yakiniku restaurant for dinner. It was a little pricey, not the all-you-can-eat kind. Taking a princess to a cheap place would have been a good way to sit through an hour of shit talking about Japanese meat. And more importantly, I can call this a business expense and invoice the king for it. Whoa Colette exclaimed. Sabine chewed ferociously in silence, captivated by the taste. Behold the overwhelming might of Japanese meat. You are powerless to resist. I'm sorry about this, Sabine. I wanted to take you to a better place, but that would have been a little expensive, Mitsuha said with regret in her voice and a smirk on her face. Her words had no effect on Colette. The girl couldn't seem to process that more delicious meat could exist, but Sabine growled audibly. She realized that Mitsuha was only bragging about how good Japanese meat is. Mwahaha, wallow in your kingdom's inferiority. I'm not getting them any raw meat. It would have been safe to eat at this restaurant, but they could get sick if they ate it at some dubious place while I'm not around, or ordered a chef in the other world to make it without proper instruction. That's why I'm only letting them eat properly cooked meat. Yakiniku restaurants served more than just meat, naturally, so once they were done, they moved on to dessert. We may be full, but you know what they say, everyone has a second stomach for dessert. They ordered every flavor of ice cream on the menu. Ugh. They all groaned a little while later. Their stomachs rumbled audibly. Guess we didn't learn our lesson. That night the three of them took a bath together and slept in Mitsuha's full-sized bed. I bought a larger bed even though it would make my room more cramped because I couldn't stop falling out of bed at night. I never thought it would come in handy like this. The detour to Japan had been necessary. They were going to resume their trip the next day, and Mitsuha had to get the girls comfortable being here in preparation for the times she might have to leave their side for an extended period of time. There was no way she could leave two beautiful young girls unguarded in the other world, especially when one of them was a princess. Rescuing them would be a cinch if they were taken hostage, as long as she knew where they were being held. But if they were captured and sold illegally as slaves, she would have virtually no chance of finding them on her own. That was why Mitsuha had to get them used to her house and the surrounding area. She needed to teach them how to deal with any unforeseen event that could occur while they were staying there alone, and prepare them for the possibility that she might never come back to retrieve them. I would have come up with another option for Sabine if she said she didn't want to live in this world, but there turned out to be no need for that. Oh, Colette? I asked her the same thing a while ago. I think it goes without saying which world she chose. She was worried about leaving her parents at first, but she said she had an older brother and sister, which was news to me. I thought she was an only child. Her sister moved to a neighboring village when she married upon turning 15, and her brother was working in Boses County. Colette dropped another bombshell as well. Her mother was pregnant again. I think I know how that happened. Her parents finally have the place to themselves now that Colette moved to my domain. Can I just have Colette, then? If they want a dowry, I'll happily pay it. Colette also explained that she would be in the most danger out of anyone in her family if the kingdom were to be invaded. Who was in power had little effect on the lives of farmers. No new ruler would mistreat them. They were an important source of tax revenue. And any fighting was unlikely to reach her distant farming village. So as long as they didn't institute conscription or some such, there was no reason for Colette to worry about her parents. She herself was in a very different position, however. She was a potential vassal for a noble house, and a cute girl on top of that. She was just the kind of person an invader would choose to make an example of on the gibbet, or turn into their personal pet. Her presence could even put the rest of her family in danger. That was why she had told her parents that if the kingdom ever fell, she would escape with Mitsuha to a new land and live happily ever after there with her. Hold on, didn't they have anything to say about that? Well, she's not wrong. If another fleet of ships arrives from that maritime nation, young people, good-looking ones, especially, would be the first to be shipped off as slaves. Young people stand a better chance of surviving a long voyage without much food or water. Yep, Colette Shaw would be a popular slave. I can't imagine a worse way to be popular. That means Colette and I are in it together, now. Same goes for Sabine. The bond would come undone if they ever got married, though. Then it would be the role of their respective husbands to protect them. Colette's voice echoed in Mitsuha's head. We'll live happily ever after in a new land. Surely she didn't mean it that way. Right? Mitsuha and the girls departed the next morning after a simple breakfast in the kitchen. Their first stop was a gas station to refuel. This was the first time Mitsuha had taken the RV to this station, and she shocked the staff when she pulled up. Mostly because they were unsure if she could reach the pedals. I elected not to do self-service. I'm afraid of doing something wrong and spraying gas everywhere, and if I got out and went about my business, a bunch of adults would probably come nosing around, thinking I was a middle schooler without a license who'd stolen my parents' camper. That even happens when I drive my subcompact, so I can't imagine how people would react if they saw me get out of an RV. That shouldn't happen here, though. I filled up my car at this station any number of times. Now I just have to convince them I can reach the pedals. Could I just fill up cans of gas and bring them to the other world? No, that wouldn't work. The RV's tank is way too big. I'd have to find a secluded place to make umpteen round trips with a 20-liter gas can. Not only would carrying it be a pain, buying that much gas would probably get me reported to the police for violating fire prevention laws. Wait, isn't it illegal to use a self-service stand to fill a gas can anyway? Man, that was close. I could have gotten in big trouble. Once the tank was full, Mitsuha drove to a supermarket parking lot, waited until there was no one around, and jumped. Jumping while they were moving could be dangerous. She didn't want to drive the massive vehicle on anything smaller than a main road, so it was hard to guarantee that their arrival would go unobserved. She then jumped back to the water treatment plant in her town and jumped again with water from the reservoir water that had been filtered and disinfected with chlorine and was about to be distributed to the town, in other words in the perfect shape to fit the RV's tank. This is the easiest and most hygienic way to get water for the RV. What? You think I'm stealing? Ugh. I'll make tons of money and pay plenty of municipal taxes, I promise. White Rook, this is King 1. The king's voice was the first thing Mitsuha heard when she jumped the RV back to the other world. The alternator powered the wireless radio while the vehicle was running, so Mitsuha just left it on all the time. This is White Rook, Mitsuha answered. What have you been doing? I was beside myself. I explained to him over and over again that I wouldn't be calling him every day. I have no way to reach him when we're in a town and away from the car. White Rook, this is White Home. What happened? I've been so worried. Count Coldmain chimed in on the delegation's radio. He must have been waiting by it with the power on. Mitsuha had told him that transmitting would consume a great deal of divine power, so he probably left it to the king to actually raise her. Oh, White Home is the call sign for the delegation. I'm using white for allies, black for enemies, and grey for anyone I'm unsure of. I chose home because the delegation is the home base of this trip. I didn't use the base part because the white base in Gundam ended up getting shot down, which seems like bad luck. Superstitions are important. Mitsuha worked to calm the king and had Sabine explain to him all over again that they were only going to call occasionally, rather than every day. Once they had him convinced, they repeated the explanation to Count Coldmain. There was no way he could reject what the king had already accepted, especially when the king was listening. But we already went over all this, and they were okay with it then. Well, they can't complain about it anymore, not after Sabine was the one to explain it to them. Not even the king is a match for her. Wait, is Sabine the most powerful person in the kingdom? We will be arriving in the capital city of Mathrika in 3 days' time. I will call you on the radio at noon the day before to give you an update, so please be ready, the count said. Understood. I'll talk to you at noon in 2 days, Mitsuha responded, and ended the call. Any number of things could go wrong while traveling by carriage: broken axles, rain-muddied roads, bridges washed away, landslides, you name it. Messengers had been sent ahead to give forewarning of the delegation's arrival, but because of the unpredictability of travel, the schedule for the talks would be decided only after they reached the capital. As such, there was no real point in calling Mitsuha in 2 days to give an update on their progress. He probably just wanted to make sure Mitsuha and the girls would be waiting in the capital when they got there. I keep my promises, I'll have you know. The first set of talks were to take place in Mathraka, the capital city of the Kingdom of Illusive, a friendly neighboring country that had already been informed of the foreign ship's arrival. Many popular reports had surely reached their ears already, and it was also likely they had dispatched agents to collect information in Boses County, Yamano County, and the capital. The delegation wasn't visiting every nation on the continent. They would skip those that were too far away, as well as some of the bordering countries. The king had sent special messengers to the latter or invited members of their royalty or nobility to the capital instead, and apparently tours of the captured ships were being prepared for those who were interested. This meant the delegation was only visiting distant but not too distant countries that were friendly, or at least neutral. There was no reason to go out of their way to teach hostile nations about the new weapons the kingdom was developing. What if the foreign ships land in one of those countries, you ask? They'll get ransacked and ask our alliance for help, which we'll grant by sending a multinational force, but only after they sign a lopsided treaty. Politics and war aren't child's play, I mean, come on. The delegation was also prioritizing coastal nations. Landlocked ones would probably reject the alliance because they weren't in immediate danger, and it would be difficult to convince every country to join on the first attempt anyway. The powerful countries would want to claim leadership of the alliance, and would definitely try to monopolize the new weapons. The best thing will be to wait for those countries to approach us and beg to join the alliance. Landlocked countries have no reason to build ships anyway, and they probably refuse an order to contribute funds for doing so. We can't give them the rifled breech loaders and cannons in exchange for a little pocket change. That's the advice I gave the king, anyway. The ultimate decision was up to him and the other leaders, so it was the will of the kingdom. I'm not in charge here. Chapter 34. Mathraka. Mitsuha and the girls arrived at the capital city of Mathraka just past noon. The delegation was making good time, but a car could do in a few hours what took days for a procession of carriages, even with Mitsuha driving at a leisurely pace. She emptied the sewage tank and left the RV at her house like last time, then each of them grabbed a backpack and a flask of water to hang at their hips. All right, we've got 3 days until the delegation arrives, let's see what this city has to offer, Mitsuha cried. Okay. Sabine and Colette cheered in response. Are you 3 girls alone? The old gatekeeper asked, looking at them suspiciously. Yup. They were used to this skeptical treatment by now. Our guardians are a little ways behind us. Grown-ups are such slowpokes, so we went on ahead. We're gonna have fun in the capital till they catch up. Mitsuha explained cheerfully. The gatekeeper looked flabbergasted. Are you crazy? What would you have done if you were attacked by a wild animal or ambushed by ne'er-do-wells? And it's not just bandits you have to worry about. There are plenty of people who would get wicked ideas seeing 3 well-dressed girls walking the road alone. Your parents must be worried sick. Don't you feel any responsibility to protect your little sisters? He kept scolding us for almost an hour, damn it. He clearly means well, though. Seems like a good guy, in fact. I'll bet he thinks we snuck off while our parents were busy with work. Which is a natural assumption. No parent would knowingly allow their kids to go on ahead by themselves. The gatekeeper insisted they wait in an office at the guardhouse until their parents arrived, but after Mitsuha told him they had already agreed on a meeting place and would go straight there, he reluctantly let them go. Geez, that was close. We almost got stuck there for 3 days. To be fair, I highly doubt the old man thought we were 3 full days ahead. I could have jumped us away while no one was looking if I had to, but that would have caused a scene, so I tried as hard as I could to convince him. That was beyond exhausting. Okay, first order of business is to find an inn, Mitsuha said. We need to choose a relatively luxurious one so as not to bring shame on the kingdom when they learn we're members of the delegation. I'm gonna invoice the king for this later anyway, so money is no object. You're way too rich to be so cheap, Mitsuha, Sabine said. Hey, that's mean. Way to hit me where it hurts. Okay, let's try this place. An inn's exterior could advertise its luxury, that is, its high prices, but there was no way to tell its quality until you actually stayed there. Mitsuha selected an expensive-looking inn near the royal palace that seemed like a good bet, then charged through the front door. Not that I ran in with a battle cry or anything. Doing that in a luxurious inn near the royal palace would be a one-way ticket to the slammer. I just strode in with confidence. A 3-person room, please. And where might your guardian be? The middle-aged man at the front desk asked. This again. It's just us, actually, Mitsuha replied. I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but we don't allow kids to stay here alone. Go on, scram. I'll hand you over to the city watch if you get in the way of our business. Mitsuha could feel herself getting pissed. I can't blame him if that's the rule, but he didn't have to be so rude to us. If he was a greenhorn clerk, I could have chalked that up to inexperience or delusions of grandeur, but this guy is old enough to know better. His attitude is probably a good indicator of the spirit of this inn. How dare you? Sabine began, but Mitsuha patted her on the shoulder. It's fine. We don't want to stay at a place like this anyway, right? Yeah. Mitsuha led Sabine and Colette outside, leaving the infuriating establishment behind to search for somewhere more promising. Let's try this one, Mitsuha said when they reached the next inn. It was slightly smaller and older than the first one, but it looked decent. Think this one will be okay? Sabine asked worriedly. Can't know unless we go in. Colette looked like she didn't care at all where they stayed, nor did she seem bothered in the least by being turned away from a high-class inn. It was unlikely she would take issue with any lodging they chose. Charge, Mitsuha cried. Welcome. Have you come to stay? A voice called out as soon as they walked through the door. It came from a man who looked around 20, standing behind the front desk. Do you have a room for 3? We don't know how long we'll be staying yet, Mitsuha replied. Not a problem. Please sign your names in the register, the clerk said cheerfully. Now that's customer service. 2 days later, in the morning, Mitsuha jumped to Yamano County with Sabine and Colette. She felt she needed to at least check in on occasion. I'm not concerned about how things are going with the domain, I just expect people are getting anxious about me. The place isn't gonna fall apart just because its lord is gone for a few days. If any domain were that unstable, then forget about me and my world-jumping power. Most nobles would never even be able to leave to visit the capital. The citizens can manage just fine on their own. I hope. Mitsuha jumped them straight to her own room to avoid startling anyone by appearing right in front of them. She led Sabine and Colette out of her room. Lady Mitsuha. Where they were immediately found by Noelle, a 10-year-old girl who had nearly been sold into a decades-long apprenticeship, human trafficking, before Mitsuha hired her. Well, I guess found isn't really the right word, she just happened to be there when I opened the door. Noelle smiled at Colette, with whom she was friendly because they were close in age, then dashed off to tell everyone that Mitsuha was back. It's so nice to see Noelle smile all naturally like that. She's brightened up so much. The assembled servants gave Mitsuha their reports, and once she had confirmed that there were no issues, she returned to her room to take care of the real reason she'd returned to her county residence. White Home, this is White Rook, over. This is White Home Leader. Can you hear me? Came Count Colbmane's voice. Mitsuha was contacting the delegation the day before their arrival as promised. It would have been a hassle to retrieve the RV and jump it outside the city every time she wanted to reach them, so she decided to use the radio at her residence. At that distance, the delegation would have been too close for UHF and VHF frequencies to work reliably, and there was a chance HF frequencies would get caught in a natural radio quiet zone. Contacting them with the HF band from her room would be more certain to work. The antenna there was better, too. Since she had so much space, Mitsuha had been able to forego a loading coil and set up a full-size horizontal dipole. "You're coming through loud and clear," Mitsuha replied. "Are you on schedule?" "Yes, proceeding as planned. We are maintaining SOA, as you put it. We should still arrive tomorrow afternoon. I sent messengers ahead to announce our arrival and secure lodging near the palace. Let's meet at our inn." "Understood. See you tomorrow." Indeed. SOA stood for speed of advance, which indicated the average speed someone must travel to reach their destination at a specified time. It's calculated by dividing the distance to be traveled by the remaining time until one is scheduled to arrive, and can be used to express how one is progressing along an intended route, such as an hour at SOA or 5 minutes behind SOA. After Mitsuha's call with Count Coldmain, Sabine joined Colette, Noelle, 12-year-old Ninette from the fishing village, and the 4-year-old apprentice maid Leah, who together made up the Yomano Munchkin maids for some playtime. "Actually, I think Leah is 5 now. And Colette's not a maid, but let's not split hairs. I introduced Sabine not as a princess, but as a candidate to become my vassal in the capital, putting her on the same level as Colette. That's what Sabine herself wanted. I doubt she gets many chances to shed her royal persona and play with friends as equals. It would have been impossible for her to act like a maid, of course, and Colette was already treating her as a friend, so it was definitely the right call. And she fit in just as well as I thought she would. She really is something special." "About ready to get going?" Mitsuha asked, thinking they should return to the inn soon. "Or?" Sabine looked dejected. She must have really enjoyed playing with the other girls like she was one of them. "Don't worry, you can come back anytime." K. Sabine was mature for her age. She did grumble on occasion, but she could judge when it wasn't the time or place to throw a tantrum. It was also likely she didn't want to embarrass herself in front of the younger girls. Once they said their goodbyes, Mitsuha jumped to the inn with Sabine and Colette to wait for the delegation's arrival the next day. "What about the 3 days in the capital?" "It was fun, but we didn't do anything particularly noteworthy. We just did some sightseeing and ate at some food stalls. You know, normal touristy stuff. Delisson is just the next kingdom over, so it's not all that different. There's no way something dramatic like getting kidnapped or pickpocketed or harassed by an obnoxious young noble is gonna happen every time we go out, especially when we all look like we're around 10 years old. In 6 years Sabine will be 16, Colette will be 15, and I'll be a 24-year-old who looks 12. Arg." Just past noon the next day, Mitsuha and the girls had finished their meal at a restaurant and were wandering the streets. They needed to find the delegation as it arrived because it would be difficult to discover where they were staying after the fact. People would probably be suspicious of 3 little girls sniffing around for the whereabouts of foreign envoys, so it was unlikely that the staff of any inn would volunteer that the delegation was staying there. They might think the girls were trying to hassle their guests by begging for money or employment, which would reflect poorly on the establishment. That was why Mitsuha wanted to find them before they checked in. A little while later, the girls spotted multiple employees walking out of a luxurious inn to wait by the entrance. They would only do that for special guests, such as the aforementioned foreign envoys, for example. "Hey, they're over there," Mitsuha said, pointing. The delegation was approaching the inn, led by a man they had sent ahead to contact the royal palace and arrange their lodging. Count Coldmain's carriage stopped in front of the inn's entrance with mounted guards in front and behind. Guards then jumped out of the nearest carriages to secure the area. The coachman signaled once everyone was in position, and the carriage's door opened. The 2 maids got out first to make sure it was safe, followed by Count Coldmain and Clarge. Mitsuha and the girls waited until they had gotten out, then approached. "Get rid of them." A middle-aged clerk barked at some of the younger employees, who hurried dutifully toward the girls. "Shoot, I'd better do something or they're going to keep us from reaching the count." "Not that I really care," but I'll lose it if they so much as lay a finger on Sabine or Colette. Count Coldmain, we've been waiting for you. Mitsuha called out as the employees rushed to bar their way. Guards from the delegation drew their swords and quickly stepped between the girls and the inn's employees. There was no way they were going to let commoners harm their princess and a viscountess. Wah! The hotel crew was shocked to see the guards defending not the members of the delegation but the three girls. Their bared steel and menacing attitudes froze the young employees in their tracks and left the middle-aged clerk at a loss for words. Hey, I remember him. He's the jerk who kicked us out the other day. Don't move. Our guards will cut down anyone who takes so much as a single step toward them. Count Coldmain said sternly, we may be foreigners, but nevertheless, I cannot overlook any insult to a princess of the realm and the head of one of our noble houses. Had you behaved the same way toward this delegation, I suspect there would have been no repercussions even had we slain you on the spot. Did you say princess? The middle-aged employee was stunned. He must have had a position of some authority, given the way he had ordered the younger staff around. Your Highness, Viscountess Yomino, are you not staying at this inn? The Count asked. No, we're not. We wanted to initially, but that man threw us out, so we went elsewhere, Mitsuha replied. Is this where you'll be staying, Count Coldmain? The Count glared at the clerk and answered dispassionately. No. We'll be finding another inn. Yep, saw that coming. Hold on. The delegation was supposed to stay with us, the employee protested desperately. And you are? The Count interrupted. My apologies. I am Golfon, assistant manager of this inn. Wow, so he's not just a clerk. I guess that makes sense, they wouldn't send just anyone to welcome a foreign delegation. It's actually weird the manager isn't here. Oh, maybe he's waiting inside to greet them. It must have been a coincidence that the assistant manager was at reception when we tried to get a room. Either way, his behavior reflects on the inn as a whole. I could have given the place a second chance if it was just a young clerk who treated us that way, but this is more than enough reason to refuse to stay here. I would have felt bad about harming the inn's reputation because of one new employee's mistake, but now I don't need to hold back. The princess and viscountess clearly have no desire to stay here, which means we of the delegation cannot do so either. It is our duty to accompany the princess. Or do you have some reason to separate us from her? No, not at all. We would be honored to have the princess and her companions join you at our humble inn. The assistant manager was nearly frantic. Huh? But earlier, you turned us away without a second thought, Mitsuha put in. That was because I was ignorant of your status. You kicked us out based purely on our appearance, without giving us a chance to tell you who we were. I don't want to stay at an inn that operates that way. Do you, Sabine? Not a chance, Sabine declared with an exaggerated grimace. Not like there was any other possible response. All right, we're going back to our own inn. Will you all stay here, Count Coldmain? Mitsuha asked. Of course not. We'll stay at the same inn as you. Please, lead the way, he responded, sending the assistant manager into a full-blown panic. Please wait. Please. This will cause great harm to our reputation. Why should that matter to us? We are staying elsewhere because you insulted our princess and a noble of our kingdom. It's as simple as that. There's nothing unusual about it except perhaps for the fact that we didn't kill you for such an affront. Eek. The delegation followed Mitsuha, Sabine, and Colette away from the inn. It wasn't far, so Count Coldmain and Clarge joined them on foot. The mounted guards and carriages trailed behind. Mitsuha heard a fuss erupt behind them, but it wasn't her problem. Glancing back, she saw someone who might have been the manager grilling the assistant manager about what had just happened. Sucks to be him. Excuse me, our companions just arrived. Is it okay if they stay here, too? Mitsuha asked. The clerk at reception was the same 20-ish man she'd spoken to the day they arrived. Yes, of course. How many more will be staying with us? he responded. Ah, how many are in the delegation again? I'll have to leave this to the Count. Sorry, you're going to have to do the rest yourself, Mitsuha told Count Coldmane. Oh, I see. We number he began, before an attendant burst through the door and raced toward them. Please, my lord, stop. You should leave such trivial tasks to us, he cried, fixing Mitsuha with a fierce glare. I am a viscountess, you know. Well, I guess that was my bad. The attendants would probably be disgraced if anyone back home heard they had allowed the Count to check into an inn by himself. Sorry. But the fact is, the Count actually looked excited to do something for himself for once, so I don't think they have anything to worry about. Clarge looked iffy about it, though. Huh? You're a diplomatic delegation from another kingdom? And you have a princess with you? What? The clerk had kept it together when he learned of Count Coldmane's noble rank, but he was unable to hide his surprise when the Count's attendant announced the purpose of their journey and the fact that they had a princess with them. This was a luxurious inn and likely got plenty of noble guests, so receiving a Count was nothing too out of the ordinary. The man may also have been a little taken aback to learn that Coldmane was with the girls, since they hardly presented as nobles, but an elite clerk like him would never let it show. Hearing that they were part of a diplomatic mission changed everything, though. It meant his new guests represented the king of a foreign country, and this inn would be the face of Delissen during their stay. That brought immense responsibility, pride, and honor. It was unheard of for such a delegation to arrive with no forewarning. Why have you chosen our inn? And why did you send no word? Because Princess Sabine wanted it that way, Mitsuha replied. Your sincerity proved to us that this is indeed a good inn, Sabine added. Whoa. Sabine can act like a princess? Act like the princess she is, I mean. I knew she was smart, but I always figured she was still kind of immature and self-involved. Wait, why is she glaring at me? Can she read minds? Anyway, I was not ready to see her act so prim and proper. Maybe I should bestow on her my title of plumber of the opera after all. The clerk blushed as anyone would after being praised by a smiling princess, even if she was only 10 years old. Being the professional he was, however, he quickly regained his composure. You honor me with your generous words, he said, and rang the bell on the counter to call for support. He struck the bell in an odd pattern. There were probably different signals he could send depending on how he rang it. Mitsuha suspected that this one meant all hands to battle stations. The door opened within seconds to reveal an elderly man at the head of a troop of employees. The man was the inn's manager. He regularly came out to greet the guests as they ate, so Mitsuha remembered his face. The bell must have been signaling a state of emergency, but he was perfectly calm. This inn continues to impress. These guests belong to a foreign diplomatic delegation. Please prepare their rooms immediately, the clerk said, explaining the situation quickly and concisely. The manager caught his breath. The bell had surely given him some idea of what to expect, but he couldn't have predicted anything like this. His eyes went wide for a moment, but he showed no other sign of emotion. I am Waldith, the manager, he said. Welcome to our humble establishment. He entrusted Count Coldmane and Clarge to a bellhop, then began to give out rapid-fire orders. He didn't want to make high-ranking nobles like them wait even a moment. It was the inn's top priority to escort them to a special room that was always kept ready for such occasions. The delegation's attendants busied themselves with unloading luggage from the carriages and preparing for dinner and tomorrow's meeting. They had plenty to do, but the Count would probably give them some leeway given the sudden nature of this change in lodging. Us? We're already staying here, so no one has to worry about us. The staff were probably surprised to learn that Sabine's a princess and I'm a viscountess, since I'll bet they thought we were just merchants' daughters, but that's it. Oh, I wonder if they'll panic when they realize they brought the Count to a special room, but left the princess in a regular one. That should be good for a laugh, so I'm not gonna say anything. Do you have a moment? Count Coldmain and Clarge had been led to their rooms, and the rest of their entourage had gone out to the carriages with the inn's employees, leaving Mitsuha and the girls alone with the manager and the young clerk. "Why did you choose to stay here?" "Most guests of your standing choose to stay at the Fairies' Rest. That was the name of the inn that had kicked the girls out, which is closer to the palace and regarded as the top inn in the capital." Mitsuha raised her hand to stop the manager there. "I had two reasons: the superior customer service of your clerk, and the difference in ideals between your two inns. A little bit of kindness goes a really long way." The manager bowed deeply, and the girls returned to their room. "Man, I sounded cool back there." "That was so dorky, Mitsuha." "Or not." A knock came at their door a little while later. It was Count Coldmain's personal attendant, announcing that his master wanted them to come to his room. The Count was understandably hesitant to barge into a room occupied by three girls, one of whom was a princess. "He probably wants to talk about our visit to the royal palace." "You wanted to see us?" Mitsuha said as they stepped into Count Coldmain's room after a few cursory knocks. "My apologies for summoning you," the Count replied, bowing toward Sabine before turning toward Mitsuha. "Our meeting is only 2 days from now, and I thought we might discuss it." Sabine ranked higher than Count Coldmain because she was royalty, but she was only here as an observer, and to lend weight to the delegation's authority. The Count was the king's real representative, but he couldn't treat Sabine as if she were lower than him, so he addressed Mitsuha instead. "What's my position? I guess you could call me an advisor, or a kind of subcontractor. The king is paying me, after all." Mitsuha and Count Coldmain got down to business. Instead of visiting every nearby country, the delegation was prioritizing friendly and neutral countries with at least some coastline. They were also going to visit an appropriate selection of friendly landlocked countries and major powers that weren't too far away. "We'd have to be crazy to try to do a circuit of every country on the continent. Sabine and Colette would be adults by the time we made it back home, and I'd be past marriageable age. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but it would take a really long time. And there wouldn't be much point in signing treaties with countries located too far from our kingdom anyway. Expert diplomats are being sent to countries with particularly ticklish issues, and the king decided it would be most effective to invite representatives from the bordering countries to show them the ships and cannons in person. We're only negotiating with a small selection of countries." "Then why were we assigned to visit Delissen, which does in fact border our kingdom?" "First of all, it's along the delegation's route, so it's not costing us much time. Second, their proximity to our kingdom probably means they know a fair amount about me. They might take it as an insult if the Great Lightning Archpriestess passed through their country without a word. And finally, the current de facto ruler of Delissen is a young princess. The king of Delissen is bedridden with illness, and his eldest daughter, Princess Remia, is taking care of affairs of state on his behalf. However, there are forces trying to elevate the first prince, yet but a small child, and thus steer the country in the direction they desire," Count Coldmain explained. I see," Mitsuha murmured. The queen was already dead, and Delissen could very well descend into chaos if the king didn't recover. Such disorder in a friendly neighboring country would be less than ideal, especially under the present circumstances. There was a chance other countries would take advantage of Delissen's turmoil to meddle in its affairs, and the conflict could even spill into neighboring countries. "So we should help strengthen the princess's position?" Mitsuha asked. "Exactly, you catch on quick," Count Coldmain said, exhibiting a rare smile, startling to see on his usually stern face. Clarge looked impressed, too. "Oh, stop. You're making me blush." Mitsuha and the girls ate dinner with the delegation afterward. They were in a room reserved for only the chief members, so the maids and guards were not present. "I can tell Count Coldmain, Clarge, and the others are excited at this rare opportunity to socialize with Sabine. The king is extremely soft on her, and I do mean extremely. Plus, she's cute, smart, and level-headed as hell. She'll marry a high-ranking noble or a foreign royal when she grows up," maybe even some crown prince or something. So getting in good with her could have huge benefits down the line. Viscountess Yomino, has it not been difficult traveling separately from the delegation? Perhaps you should rejoin us. You're free tomorrow, right, Mitsuha? We should go sightseeing. My lady, I have an enticing proposal regarding the sale of local specialties. The subject of finding a spouse for the Count's son has come up. You know, I could put in a good word for you. Would you like to play shogi later? Ooh, that's smart. Shogi would be a great way to monopolize my time for an extended period. Wait a second. It's me thereafter, not Sabine. Mitsuha spent the rest of the meal pleasantly chatting with the other attendees. I might be traveling separately, but we're still working together. There's no need to make waves if I can avoid it. I'm perfectly capable of socializing like an adult. The fundamental Japanese skill of making no commitments or definitive statements and always forcing a smile really comes in handy. Mitsuha and the rest of the delegation had breakfast with the maids and the guards the next morning. Count Coldmane and the other dignitaries were visibly unhappy about it, but they had to relent when Mitsuha told them Sabine wanted to eat with the common folk. This wasn't a lie, but there was another major reason Mitsuha and the girls wanted to eat breakfast with the whole crew, to keep the members of the delegation from asking about their plans and offering invitations while they ate. The trio rushed back to their room as soon as they had finished eating, and Mitsuha jumped them out of the inn so they could explore the capital on their own. Anyone who did go so far as to look for them in their room would find it empty. Our disappearance isn't going to worry any of the staff of the inn, though. I told the nice clerk on the day we arrived that we'd be eschewing the main entrance to avoid anyone who might want to follow three pretty young girls, so he shouldn't panic if we suddenly disappeared from our room or seemed to reappear out of nowhere. I said we'd be leaving through the back door, climbing out the windows, maybe even crawling under the floor or through the rafters. He took it as a joke, but said we could do as we pleased because we had paid in advance. He did tell us not to complain if we got mistaken for robbers and arrested, though. Time to go, Count Coldmane said with a sour expression. He had been unable to find the three girls at all the previous day. Clarge looked just as cranky. We didn't take any chances yesterday. We ate dinner out, then jumped right back to our room when it was time for bed. The gifts the delegation had brought from the kingdom were loaded into the carriages. Sabine and Colette didn't have to carry anything at all, while Mitsuha just had a rifle case slung over her shoulder which, as the name implied, held the rifle she would use to demonstrate the strength of their new weapons. She had intentionally chosen an old model, showing them the latest assault rifle would have been beyond overkill. All three girls had pistols equipped in holsters on their thighs and under their left arms. They decided against knives, since it wouldn't do to be discovered wearing recognizable weapons in the presence of royalty and nobility. They had to wear skirts to hide the thigh holsters. Sabine wore a frilly dress she had packed in the delegation carriage, while Mitsuha and Colette opted for similar but Japanese-made ones. Dresses made in this world for nobility are absurdly expensive, and you can find dresses just as nice in Japan for way less money, though Sabine and Colette were horrified by the panties the first time I had them try on Japanese clothing. They're definitely less protective than the bloomers girls wear as undergarments here. Anyway, the members of the delegation are gonna take care of the negotiations and the gifts and whatnot. My only job is to demonstrate the rifle and answer questions as the delegation's technological advisor. All Sabine has to do is be present and smile, and Colette just has to melt into the background and not draw attention to herself. Alright, let's move out. Welcome to Delisten. I trust your journey was an easy one. Princess Remia was a beautiful girl with sharp features and clear eyes who looked to be around 16 years old. Sure, she looks much older than me, but that's because she's white. She somehow looks beautiful, dignified, cute and sweet all at the same time. What would be the best way to describe her? I guess she looks like the textbook definition of a princess. It's uncanny. Count Coldmane and Sabine knelt before Remia where she sat atop a dais in the throne room. Sabine was also a princess, but Remia was the first princess, second in the line of succession, and was currently acting on behalf of the king. By contrast, Sabine was the third princess, fifth in the line of succession, and a good deal younger and less experienced. She was also a visitor seeking audience in Remia's land. She had no choice but to defer to Remia's rank. Mitsuha and Clarge were a little way behind them, with 4 attendants at their back. The rest of the delegation was waiting in a different room. Some of the guards had been stationed in the carriages to prevent anyone from fishing for diplomatic documents or the captured weapons, not that anyone in the delegation was foolish enough to leave those behind. The radio's in there, I guess, and we wouldn't want anyone finding that. This audience was purely ceremonial. All they were doing was greeting the princess and presenting their gifts in front of the assembled courtiers. They weren't going to hold the actual talks in front of so many eyes and ears. Once the ceremony ended, all who were participating in the talks headed for the conference room. Now for the real deal. Chapter 35. The first meeting. It's finally time for the first diplomatic meeting. I'm so nervous. I mean, I've talked with our king lots of times, but those were just personal conversations. This conversation isn't between people, it's between countries. That gives it a whole different weight. Not that I'm actually gonna be doing any of the talking. That's Count Coldmane's job. Plus, this is just a preparatory meeting for the official treaty talks that'll take place at a later date. But still, they had moved to a conference room for the meeting, and the Dalasonian side was represented only by their key leaders. Remia would lead the talks for them, which was to be expected given the importance of this meeting. The other attendees seemed to be chancellors and government ministers and military brass and the like. Mitsuha didn't know any of their actual titles. Let us waste no time getting to the purpose of our visit, Count Coldmane said after a brief round of introductions. As I'm sure you're already aware, we are here to discuss the matter of the foreign ships that attacked our kingdom. The enemy staged a unilateral assault with 3 giant warships, each large enough to carry hundreds of soldiers equipped with powerful new weapons called cannons and guns. They demanded sovereignty, treasure, and slaves. The Dalasonian side of the table buzzed with consternation upon hearing the invaders' extreme demands. They knew about the enemy fleet, but only Mitsuha, the king, and his closest advisors knew what she had discussed with the invaders, so none of the particulars had gotten out. Fortunately, we captured all 3 warships before they could inflict much damage on our shores, Count Coldmane finished. A snicker went around the room at the offhanded way he described their bloodless victory over such formidable opponents. But everyone in the room already knew about the captured ships. What they didn't know was the strength of the enemy's weapons. Are you saying the enemy nation is nothing to fear? That they are no threat to us, either? One of the Dalasonian ministers asked, voicing what everyone was thinking. These talks are going nowhere if we allow them to think that. Well, they are nothing to fear, if you happen to have the goddess's protection when the enemy attacks, Coldmane said. Had the goddess not saved us, the invaders would be carrying off treasure and a great many slaves even as we speak. We would be a vassal state, trembling in fear as we awaited the arrival of our new governor-general. Cries of astonishment filled the conference room. The Dalasonian leaders never expected to hear those words from a kingdom with an army powerful enough to repel an imperial invasion with minimal losses, killing 2 ancient dragons and driving another off in the bargain. Mitsuha figured they knew most of the details of that event. Aside from the true identity of the soldiers she had summoned, it must have been a little hard to believe such a country would be no match for 3 measly ships. Count Coldmane was slightly exaggerating, of course. The crews of those 3 ships alone could not have occupied the entire kingdom, and their cannons were no threat to the capital because their range was limited to a few miles. But they might have been able to use the threat of those weapons and the power of their homeland to force the kingdom into a one-sided treaty. The next fleet might very well have carried many more soldiers, along with a governor-general to rule the new colony. So while he was exaggerating, he wasn't just blowing smoke, he was simply compressing the inevitable sequence of events. As such, we hope to form an alliance with our neighbors in preparation for the coming of the next enemy fleet, Count Coldmane went on. The purpose of our visit is to explain the situation and hear your thoughts and opinions before the official treaty talks take place. So your kingdom intends to initiate the talks and serve as mediator? Someone scoffed. It wasn't unusual for the initiator of diplomatic talks to mediate them as well. Being the mediator came with a variety of benefits, however, so a major country like Illusive was not going to give that up lightly. Yes, that is our intention. But it is not simply because we're the ones initiating the talks. The enemy warships, cannons, and guns are in our possession, and we have naturalized most of their former soldiers, the only ones who know how to produce and handle these things as citizens of our kingdom. We are therefore uniquely qualified to develop the technological skills to recreate them, Count Coldmain answered. There was no argument. The truth of his words was all too apparent. No other country could serve as mediator. Opening up the role to anyone else would simply lead to conflict, as a multitude of countries put themselves forward for the role. Illusive's leaders may have been reluctant about it, but they could see that their neighbor was most fit for the job. Are these new weapons really as powerful as you say? Your soldiers easily defeated the enemy forces, did they not? No, we would have stood no chance if it came to open combat. Their small numbers and limited supplies might have been an issue, but we would have had no way of defeating them without suffering heavy losses. All we could have done would be to wait for them to run out of resources. And now that they know of this continent, they'll see it as a hunting ground where they can take all the slaves and treasure they want. And next time, they will send sufficient ships and soldiers. Silence overtook the room. And you're willing to demonstrate the strength of these new weapons for us? Remia, who had remained silent until now, suddenly spoke. That's what that bundle is for, am I right? She pointed at the long case Mitsuha bore. Wow, she's sharp. You never know what you're gonna get with royalty, but she's a good one. Guess this means it's my turn. Yes, Your Highness, Mitsuha replied. And you are? Remia asked. I am Mitsuha von Yomano, technological advisor to this delegation. Huh? You're the one who? Remia trailed off, looking startled. A stir swept through the Delasonian contingent. I wonder how much they know about me. Do they think I'm just the brave noble girl the royal palace announced me to be? Or are they aware of the open secret in the capital that I'm a princess from another land who has special abilities thanks to my connection with the goddess? I don't know what you mean by the one, but I am Viscountess Yomano, Mitsuha said. Remia's eyes shone as she gazed silently at Mitsuha. What is she thinking? But man, she really is something. Beautiful, dignified, cute. It's like she was grown in a lab to be the perfect princess. Sabine couldn't be more different. Never mind.